Hey guys, today I wanted to show you my process for making textured acrylic paintings. This is a process that I really enjoy. I've also done some paintings like this with watercolor, so you can really use any kind of paint. It's a lot of fun. And I tried to make today's example kind of simple so you can see the process I go through for my art, but also it's basic enough that if you wanted to try it out yourself, you could definitely gather up the materials and play along. Creating a textured base before you paint can make your projects look really unique, and it's something that beginners can do too. You don't have to have any advanced art experience. It's something that's really playful and experimental. So for a base, you can use either canvas or even just some heavy paper. You can use watercolor paper, you can use cardstock, and then just put it in a frame after when you're done. And you also need some just odds and ends materials. So I have lace here. I have netting from a bag of avocados. I have some paper towel that kind of has a textured design on it. And now I'm going to adhere these materials to my surface here, which I'm using watercolor paper with gesso. And gesso is really just like a thick acrylic material that can coat a surface and get it prepped and ready to paint, and also can adhere different materials and act as an adhesive. And to apply the gesso, I always use one of those cheap foam paint brushes, simply because gesso can kind of wreck paint brushes, and it also is just easier to really just slap it on. Like, I'm just going to dump my gesso here all over the surface. I have my lace down, and then from there I'm going to go ahead and use the foam brush to just kind of smooth it out. And so I'm using a combination of brushing back and forth and also kind of stamping up and down to press the lace onto the surface. And this will get messy, so I have just a plastic bag under it so I don't wreck the table. And you are going to get it all over your hands. It's just, you have to just accept it as part of the process. So next I'm going to go ahead with my netting, and I'm going to just cut out some pieces of netting here. You can even really just rip it too. And I'm just kind of arranging it a little bit randomly. I like to just put all the materials down first and then kind of see a picture in it afterwards, or see what direction I want to go in. So I'm overlapping it partially with the lace, but also have it covering up some of the plain area that's still left. And the netting can be a little bit harder to attach, so I'm really just pressing down hard with my foam brush as I apply the gesso, just to really get it stuck in there. And the gesso is really thick and kind of globby, so it really grabs onto things and holds them down, which is nice. So now I've ripped up some strips of the paper towel. And same thing, I'm just gonna lay them down, and then after I've decided where I want them to go, I'm just gonna pour some of the gesso over and get them really saturated and press them onto the paper. And you will end up using your fingers, like I said. If you have anywhere where there's some bubbles or some of your materials that are sticking up still, you can always just press them down with your finger. But you want texture, so it's okay to have wrinkles. This isn't about perfection. You can have parts that are kind of bumping up a little bit. You can have crinkles. It even isn't a bad thing to have globs of gesso on there, which I'm actually going to purposefully just squeeze some of that extra gesso out of my foam brush. The foam brushes really can suck a lot of that in, and you know, why waste materials? So I'm gonna go ahead and squeeze some of that extra gesso out and leave it raised up on the surface, and then it'll dry kind of three-dimensional and bumpy. It won't flatten back out actually. So however you lay that gesso on, because it's so thick, it will stay raised like that and bumped up, and so that's another cool way to add texture. So you will need more than one coat, but I figured that'd be kind of boring to watch. So here is the finished product now that it's dried, and I put 2 coats on so you can see it's covering a lot better. You don't see the green coming through from the netting anymore. So now it's time to paint, and I'm going to start by adding the base for the background. So I have a couple colors here. I'm just using a plastic disposable plate for a palette. You can also use foil, a ripped out page from a magazine, anything you have laying around, a piece of scrap cardboard. So now starting with just a large flat brush, I'm taking some of my teal, and I mixed a decent amount of water into it. And I'm just taking some of my teals and blues and really just stamping up and down with the brush to get in all those little crevices, swiping across. I'm just going in all different directions with my paintbrush and adding water every so often, and this helps the paint seep into all the different crevices that were created with the texture. And I'm really just mixing all my colors together and blending them until I have a cool abstract background that I like the look of. So you can pick any color scheme. I decided to go with blues just because that's what I was feeling, but you can pick any combination of colors and just blend them together until you have the look you want. And now I'm just brushing really lightly over the top with some metallic turquoise. It's always fun to pick up some of those metallic craft paints, and just adds a little bit of sheen to it. I've done that in a lot of my other textured paintings that I showed earlier too, because that metallic will just catch on the raised areas, kind of like a distressed look almost, if you just really lightly brush over it, and it has a pretty cool effect. So now that I've let that dry, I'm going to start painting my actual main object over this. So I've chose to do a whale just because I simply looked at the shape I had going on and looked at the texture and kind of like looking at cloud shapes and trying to find a form out of it. That's what I did, and I just saw a whale. So that's what I decided to do. So it's kind of fun to just look at what you have going on and see what shapes you can see in it. So I'm going ahead now with some black, and I'm using a medium-sized round brush, which are the brushes that come to a little point at the end. And I'm just starting by outlining my main shape. And I have a little bit of water mixed into my black, simply because, again, having it be a little watered down on a textured surface is a good idea, because you'll have an easier time getting it to run into all the little crevices so you don't end up with blank spots. And I found a reference picture online of a whale, and so I'm kind of using that as my guide. Now I'm just filling it all in black, so I'm just laying down my main base color first. And it can be a little bit tricky to paint over texture like this, especially the heavy texture that I have where the netting is. So you just want to go kind of slowly and carefully, and you might have to run over some areas more than once, or you might have to kind of stamp up and down with your brush to get in the little crevices. But if you make multiple coats over it, it will fill in. So now I've let that dry a little bit, but I'm still not going to add any detail over the whale yet, just to give it a little bit of extra drying time. And I'm taking a small round brush and I'm just making some streaks for the surface of the water. So I'm just taking some white and I put a little bit of water in it so that it flows a little easier. I'm just going back and forth making some streaks. And with round brushes, if you press down a little lighter and just use the tip of the brush, you'll get really thin lines. And the harder you press down, you'll get thicker lines. So you can really adjust the line weight while you're painting by adjusting your pressure. And that's how I'm getting these wavy shapes. And anytime you find your paint kind of getting stuck in the texture, not flowing well, just add a little bit more water to it. Now I'm going and doing the same thing with some watered down dark blue, kind of going in between my white reflections with some of that darker color and starting to build the surface of the water. Next, I'm going to go ahead with a medium-sized flat brush, which are the brushes that have a rectangular shaped end. And I'm going to add a little bit of dark blue to the bottom as the whale's going deeper into the water, just to add a little bit of depth. So I have some darker blue that has some water in it, and I'm going ahead and just brushing straight up from the bottom, adding some streaks. And my black is still a little bit wet, but that's actually working in my favor because I can draw down some of that dark from the black in the whale into my darker blue in the bottom of the water too. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. We're still just doing the base layering so we can blend some of that black and blue together, and then we'll add a little more definition later. And this is really going to give it the look like it's underwater by having all this streaking. And you can see where the darkest color kind of sticks to the raised texture, so you end up with a really cool effect where you have some, that again, a kind of a darker distressed look over top where there's texture, and it's a little lighter where it's smoother. And that's just from the different ways that the paint catches in the texture that you have down. And so I'm continuing to add some streaks going up and smearing some of that black out as I go closer to the surface of the water that I painted. And now I'm actually adding some more black down in the corners, and I'm just brushing really lightly over the surface. And so not putting a lot of pressure at all, just going really light. And this light touch is causing the black to only really stick where there's raised areas. And so again, that gives us our dark and light. So I'm just brushing really lightly over the top of this textured area. And next I'm adding a little bit of black even to the surface of the water just to balance out the color. So I've watered down my black, and using that same brush I used earlier, I'm adding some streaks of the black in between over the blue. And this is just going to give us a little more balance so that we have dark in the bottom and then a little bit of dark in the top also. So whenever you're painting something, or what kind of project it is, as you go along, you're going to see where you might want to add more of a certain color or darken something up as your painting develops. So you can always go back to an area you already did and add more. And now I'm going with the darker blue again with my flat brush, and I'm just really defining the top surface of the water from the deeper below. And I'm just using the tip of my brush to make a thin blue line, and then I'm brushing some paint downwards from there. And that's going to be just something that further creates depth. And I started a little more subtle, and then I'm slowly darkening it up just because it's a lot easier to go darker rather than try to make something lighter afterwards. So I'm blending together a darker and a lighter blue, leaving it darker up top and getting gradually lighter. And the nice thing about acrylic paint is if you do make a mistake, you could, once it dries, you can cover it right over. So anything you don't like in your painting, you can just let it dry and then cover it over after. And now that the black is pretty dry, I'm going ahead and adding my white detail to my whale. So I'm using a smaller round brush so that I'm able to more carefully add details and have a little more control. And I'm outlining my shapes first based on my reference, and then filling them in. So I'm just filling everything in solid white. And now I'm going ahead and with a medium-sized round brush, I'm just deepening the black. It got a little washed out as we were blending the blue over it, and so I'm just further defining the shape, adding some of that definition back in, and outlining around the edge to make a more defined hard edge. And also just adding another coat of black wherever I see that there's still some of the blue showing through. And now I'm taking some of the metallic turquoise from earlier that I used a little bit of in the background, and I'm using it to add highlights just for fun. So I'm working with black that's still a little bit wet, so it's going to blend a little more subtly instead of being this really bright turquoise coming out all of a sudden, because it's going to be mixing with that black. And I'm just lightly brushing a little bit of this over the edge, just using the tip of my brush, and I'm not really pressing down much at all. So that's leaving it where most of the turquoise is sticking to the raised texture that I have. And then it's mixing in a little bit with the black. So I'm just really lightly brushing over the edges and wherever there would be highlights with this metallic. Next, I'm adding some fish in the background, and I'm going really impressionistic with this. I'm just giving the idea of fish. They are not going to be full detail because they're really tiny. So I'm using a round brush in a smaller size, the size I wanted for the fish, and I'm really just getting some yellow paint on the tip and pressing right down. And so we're ending up with these little oval shapes just naturally from stamping down with the brush. And then on some of the bigger ones, I'm going ahead and adding just a little V shape coming out of the end for the tail. And again, it's just giving the impression of fish. So I'm overlapping some little yellow ovals and creating kind of a curved flow of fish coming behind the whale. This is just something else that adds a little more dimension and interest. And now I'm returning to my whale. Now that has a little bit more of a chance to dry, I'm going along the outer edge where I really want a lot of definition, which is one more coat of that metallic turquoise. So I'm leaving most of it blended in with the black where it's a little more subtle, but as I'm seeing that I just want a little more definition to pop it out from the background, I'm going along just that outer edge with one more coat to brighten it up a little bit more. And I'm even brushing some of that metallic outline out into the background. And that's just something else that's going to make the whale really pop out. And now I'm taking some white and a medium-sized round brush, and I'm going to add some reflections down in the deeper area of the water as well. And I'm overlapping some of them right over my whale, just because this is going to add more depth and really give it the look that's underwater. So I wanted it to look like you're seeing all the sea life from under the water looking straight through, so there would be some of those reflections. And I'm adding a little bit of water to some of my whites so that it's blended out and a little bit lighter, so we don't have any streaks that are a harsh, completely opaque white. And I'm taking more of my favorite metallic paint and streaking that in with the white also. And especially for water, having that kind of shimmery effect is going to be really cool. now that my yellow and the fish has had a chance to dry, I'm taking some bright blue and I'm just adding a little streak of bright blue kind of across the center of the fish, still leaving it really impressionistic, but fish always have more than one color on them, so I'm just adding a little streak of another color just to make them look a bit more finished. But that's really all you need to do, because again, they're so tiny, they really don't need a lot of detail. I'm just adding a little tiny white reflection to the eye. Anytime you're painting a person or animal and you add that little white highlight in the upper corner, it just makes it look a lot more alive. And then taking some of that same brighter kind of cerulean blue that I used to add to the fish, I'm adding a couple little streaks of this over top my whale and through the water too. And it's really just a process of building and continuing to add detail until it looks good, basically. So you can just keep slowly adding streaks and detail until you're happy with how it looks. And that's it, you're finished. So I really hope you guys have fun with this and try it out yourself. You don't have to paint the same exact thing, although you can follow along and try to make a scene like this if you want, but you could also do anything else you might enjoy painting. You can keep it really simple for your first time. You can even really just make something abstract for fun too. So just play around with this, have fun, and I hope you enjoyed watching.